Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and I have to start off saying last night I was out with a friend, longtime reader of the blog, longtime reader of my work, who claims to have listened to every single episode of this podcast. And the thing he said to me, the smart aleck, is he said, "Don't forget to introduce Chad tomorrow." So I'm going to tell you, I will remember right now to introduce my co-host, before I do anything else, my co-host Chad Oban, who is on the show.
It doesn't sound to me like your friend is a smart aleck. It sounds like he actually does listen to every episode and realize you always forget to introduce me.
I do. It's terrible. It's my own fault. Nick, I introduced Chad. We got that done right away. Box checked. We're going to talk about a story that's, it's made national headlines, obviously heading into the holidays, and now after the holidays, it continues to make headlines. It's State Representative Nico Rios, Republican from Williston, who was arrested last year for DUI. During the arrest, I published the video where he berated the arresting officers. He made homophobic slurs towards the officers, a lot of other insulting comments, insulted the immigration status. One of the officers identified in the video, and you could tell from his accent, he had a delightful English accent, but is an immigrant from England, moved to the United States. Representative Rios, belittled that. Just ugly comments. And has yet to resign. He continues to be in office. Now, he was sentenced this week. He got a pretty standard sentence that you see for a DUI, $1,000 fine. There's a jail sentence, but all the days are suspended. And he also had to pay a $50 fine for open container. But I think there's serious questions to ask about his level of accountability in this. He has not heeded calls from Republican leaders to resign, although Republicans, frankly, have sent a mixed message when you have the chair of the party, Sandy Sanford, basically calling on him to resign and then recanting that. And also, I think something that the North Dakota Fraternal Order of Police, obviously law enforcement group, has been posting on social media, a point that they've made over and over again, is that Representative Rios has not apologized directly to the law enforcement officers who he berated. And by the way, I think what has also been noted, he hasn't made any apologies to the LGBTQ community either. But we're going to speak to the law enforcement side of that today with our guest, Aaron Moss. Aaron is a former retired member of the Minot Police Department and also the Sergeant at Arms of the North Dakota Fraternal Order of Police. Aaron, how are you?
Good. How are you doing today, Rob?
Tell me, how I think it's very important that law enforcement officers, especially all we've been through over the last few years, that law enforcement officers have a good relationship, obviously, with the communities that they serve and also our policymakers. And so as you've watched this situation unfold with Representative Rios, how is your organization and yourself as a law enforcement veteran, how has this made you feel?
Well, and by and large, you're absolutely correct. We strive to maintain a good working relationship with our communities and those who are elected to make policy. I would say, let me just, before I get into my feelings on the matter, let me just point out that our position at the North Dakota Fraternal Order of Police has never, from the start of this incident, has never been partisan in any way, shape, or form. It's never been overtly political in that sense. We just looked at a circumstance of just gross behavior, misbehavior, I should say, in the face of law enforcement officers just professionally and ethically and responsibly doing their job when it came to this incident with Representative Rios. And it's it's kind of a situation where, every law enforcement officer who's worked up any kind of patrol assignment ever, they just kind of nod their head. Yeah, this sort of thing happens. It happens very frequently. Not a daily occurrence, but it's not unheard of that officers are treated in this manner when they're simply doing their job and protecting the community from a very, very dangerous and life-threatening behavior of driving under the influence on our highways. What made this obviously different was this man's an elected representative of a district in North Dakota, and that's extraordinarily frustrating in so much as we rely on these folks to come up with sound public policy that we're required to enforce as law enforcement officers. The 1,400 plus members of the North Dakota Fraternal or Police rely on these folks, as well as the law enforcement officers who aren't a member of our organization. And when confronted with this kind of behavior, it just makes it that much harder. It kind of cuts the legs out from under us when we have to try to show people who might disagree with some of the legislation. Well, look, representatives don't have to or aren't complying. Why should I? Kind of thing. And most people understand that DUI is something that shouldn't be toyed with, but at the same time, it degrades our ability to keep the public safe.
Aaron, I will say watching the video made me angry, and I thought about my 7-year-old son who, if we're at a parade or anything like that, he always goes up to a police officer and says thank you and looks up to them. And if you could see the back of my computer, it's riddled with Bismarck Police Department stickers that he's received. He likes to put them on the back of. And I think about the respect that we try to teach our kids to have for police officers, and to know that the police officers are there to keep them safe, right? They're not bad guys. They're not, they're there to keep us safe. And the behavior from Representative Rios really made me angry to see that. But one of the things that I don't think has gotten as much publicity is he did say the homophobic things. He did say the racist things, but do you know who I am? It's almost a threat of, if you mess with me, this could cost you your job, is how I interpreted that. Is that something that police generally see in the public from, maybe it's a community member or something like that? And how did that aspect of it make you feel? I can call the attorney general. Well, you're not above the law, man. So how did that make you feel?
Well, Chad, yeah, I mean, I can say from my own experience in nearly 30 years of differing criminal justice professions, it's not unheard of, but thankfully, the vast majority of folks that are in elected positions or positions of other positions of power generally respect that, even when they catch themselves in a bit of a bind with law enforcement. Like I say, you work in this job long enough, you're gonna run across some kind of circumstance where you're dealing with a person of authority or an elected official, for example, and doing something wrong. And like I say, the majority of the time it's kind of a nothing incident in that regard. But when this sort of thing happens, it's angering, it's frustrating, it's for maybe a newer officer might cause a little bit of unnecessary anxiety and fear. I'd just like to point out that the officers that, Officer Alex Welch, who's one of our members, and the other officer present, Anthony Burgess, performed remarkably well in the face of that kind of behavior.
Yep.
I while I was angry and I was upset by it, I also had kind of a bit of a chuckle when I saw that Officer Rios was invoking Attorney General Wrigley's name in the process, simply because he's been such a strong supporter of law enforcement. If you look back to when he was speaking on Officer Waleen's killing in Fargo, as well as the other officers that were grievously wounded in that instance, and then Officer Robinson's reaction, where his two-word response to the question of how we should respond, or what's the expectation when it comes to how the public should respond to the whole incident and Officer Robinson's behavior in particular. He said, "Be worthy." Well, I think this is a shining example of how somebody is not being worthy in response to that kind of behavior, in that kind of incident, terrible incident in Fargo. And then when Deputy Martin was killed in the line of duty, A.G. Wrigley stood up again and said, Paul did his part. Will we do our part? He said that at the funeral that so many of us were in attendance, and clearly, this kind of behavior on a traffic stop or an arrest or for whatever reason, just speaking to a police officer in this manner is not being worthy, and it's not doing our part. And so when the representative went ahead and tried to say, well, I'll just call the AG, my paraphrase of what he said, but it's just like, okay, yeah, good luck with that.
I'm glad I wasn't the only one. I mean, it's not a laughing situation. It was very upsetting to watch, but I laughed when it got to that point. And I actually called. I had the video, and as soon as I saw that, I put in a request to A.G. Wrigley because I wanted to verify. Did he actually try to call? Did he get a phone call about this? And he did not. And expressed a lot of surprise that Representative Rios would think that he would intervene in any way on his behalf in that situation. So it's
right.
just yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It would be totally unethical had he, professionally as well as personally, had he tried to intervene. And the fact that even if he did receive that call, which, like you say, I have no reason to believe he did, even the whole concept that A.G. Wrigley would intervene it's
absurd.
It's such a foreign concept to me. Yeah. It's absurd.
But two of the things that really bother me with this, I mean, the officers acted professionally, and I know I wish they didn't, but I mean, unfortunately, as you've indicated, it's a part of the job. And we see these stories pop up, usually not involving an elected official, but we see these sorts of things pop up now and then. What really bothers me about it is the lack of accountability from Representative Rios, where I reported today that he's put out calls where I'm very sorry for my behavior, has not personally apologized to the officers involved. He did reach out to the Williston Police Department. Chief David Peterson told me shortly after the arrest, but did not follow through on a meeting. And I'm really worried that the people who are going to think that this is an appropriate way, or at least maybe not appropriate, but maybe this is a way that you can get away with treating police officers, not just in the context of a DUI, but maybe they stop by when you're at the park and tell you to turn your music down because, you're bothering people, or maybe they stop by and say that, or pull you over for a speeding ticket. I mean, whatever the context, it's like this feeling, and I understand when you interact with law enforcement, maybe you're not at your best, maybe it's not the best situation. I get it. I worry that if there's no consequences for what Representative Rios did outside of, what he's been sentenced for the DUI, I worry that the people get it in their minds that, well, it's just okay to treat cops this way, which A, it's not, and B, we have a hard enough time recruiting law enforcement officers in this state, and really, I would say probably a lot of places in the country. We have a hard enough time getting people to do that job without creating this notion in our society that, if a cop makes you mad because he tells you to turn down your music or something, you could just tee off on him and behave this way, and there's no real ramifications for you at all. That bothers me a lot.
Well, yeah, I would say, we have to strike a balance. Yes, nobody should behave this way. I mean, it's just not a way that people in a civil society should speak to each other. Ultimately, there are First Amendment protections when it comes to.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not talking about criminalizing. Yeah, I don't want to start arresting people for saying awful things. As you said, the First Amendment exists.
Right, and we all take an oath to uphold the Constitution. That includes the First Amendment. I can tell you just from my own personal experience, when I worked, throughout the years, I heard very interesting things directed my way, and to put it, politely, but what came to mind also is like during the DAPL protests, I did a few rotations in working with the police response down there in southern Morton County, and I learned some very interesting things about my mother. I learned some very interesting things about my political persuasion. I've learned some very interesting things about my involvement in history. I learned that I was part of the Gestapo, which I think this is not about me, but my half Jewish lineage found that very interesting. So these things they're said, and most of the time it's just water off a duck's back. It's no big deal in terms of, okay, you're lashing out at a uniform, you're lashing out at a system, you're lashing out at not an individual that's standing there. But when it comes to elected officials doing this, it takes it to a different level. When there's homophobic slurs that are spewed out there, or immigration status information or immigration status is insulted. It's like you said, Robin. We have a recruiting crisis in North Dakota when it comes to law enforcement, and you're right, it's across the country as well. And Officer Welch, he's been a lawful resident of the United States for several years now. He's a police officer for a little under a year. He's been and he's only been a member of our order for about 5 months, but he saw the value of this type of representation in this organization. And before he was a cop down in Texas, he was an EMT and firefighter for 5 years before moving here. And when I was chatting with him about it, he's just very upbeat. He's like, he said, public safety is my jam. I said, yeah, no kidding. That's where you're at. I got it. And I think speaks to his Officer Welch's integrity here is that when I asked him if he had any comment or any thoughts he wanted me to share on specifically to the incident with Representative Rios, he said, I don't have any comments regarding Representative Rios. I'm here to do a job I swore and took an oath to do. And I'm sure he would have much preferred that, Representative Rios treat him with a little bit more civility, or a lot more civility. But ultimately, he recognized he has a job to do, and he's upholding that Constitution, even though that this is not his native country. And I think that goes, says 1,000 times more about his character than what was presented to him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy Representative Welch has come to make our country and our state his home. Happy to have him.
Absolutely. One of the things that's really stuck out to me during this whole thing is that Representative Rios, on the front end of this, before Rob got before he reported on the actual video, it was all about he was taking personal responsibility, and he's really being a straight shooter in terms of taking blame.
Nobody's more of a straight shooter than I am, is what he wrote on Twitter. Yeah.
But then you watch the video and it's very much, why are you picking on me? Why are you doing this to me? I'm only 2 blocks from my house. There wasn't a lot of personal responsibility then. And it still seems like there's a lack of personal responsibility in terms of his response to this incident, right? I mean, many of the supporters have said other people have gotten DUIs, other people have done terrible things, and we haven't kicked them out. I don't know if the Fraternal Order of Police has taken a stance officially or not, but do you think he should resign? And if he doesn't resign, do you think the folks in his legislative district should recall him? I think it was Representative Lefor, when he was on, basically said, how do you have a legislator receiving testimony from law enforcement after he's treated law enforcement like this? I mean, do you think he should resign? Do you think there should be a recall? What does the FOP think should happen here?
Well, give me just a second. Sorry. Yeah, I'm in my work office.
No problem. It happens.
All right. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Chad. As far as do we think he should resign? Yeah, I think that's probably a fair conclusion. I don't know that, if anybody understands, let's just put it this way: if anybody understands that people can make boneheaded decisions and can survive that, law enforcement understands it. But sometimes it's so egregious that there's really no coming back from that. So yeah, resignation is probably in order here. Ultimately, that's his choice. As far as the voters in District 2023, again, that's up to them. We support and defend the Constitution and the elective process is part of that, obviously, and ultimately that's up to them. We wouldn't say that we don't support that, because that's probably, that's probably, like I said, if resignation is in order, then recall probably is as well. as far as Majority Leader Lefor, yeah, we absolutely agree that removing him from the interim Judiciary Committee was absolutely the correct choice. At best, testifying before him would be an awkward distraction, and at worst, there'd just be too much interference in terms of feelings and ideas, just from that distraction to, I think, effectively communicate. And it's like one time can be severe enough, and that this is one of those instances. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the legislature, his party, as well as the voters in his district. And again, this isn't, from our perspective, our opinions are not partisan,
right?
And we have to work with every elected official, regardless of what letter follows their name. And not to say we don't get involved in politics, we do, but we're a nonpartisan organization.
Yeah, this isn't about whether he's a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or anything else. It's about the fact that a public official, a public servant, disgraced himself. And nobody's entitled to those offices they hold. And ultimately, we can all have our opinions. As you said, it's ultimately up to Representative Rios and the people of District 23. But I think holding elected office is a privilege. And when you disgrace yourself in this way, maybe you don't get that privilege anymore. Anyway, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I think this is an important perspective that was important to get out. And I guess we'll see what happens on this going forward.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Well, just finish up our interview. That was Aaron Moss, former Minot Police Department officer. And I've met Aaron several. He's a great guy at community events. Haven't met him in a professional capacity. That sounded bad.
I've met him several times.
Yes, he's never had to come tell me to turn down the Ozzy Osbourne or anything like that. But he, I met him at community. Like he was a big one for the Minot Police Department. Where he would do like community events. So he was always giving my son stickers and let him sit in I have pictures of Cooper in the patrol car, big grin on his face. Absolutely loved it. So great guy, a professional, wonderful ambassador for the law enforcement community. And I thought made some excellent points. This isn't about politics. This is about an individual, Representative Nico Rios, who behaved in a well-documented and unambiguous way that was completely inappropriate for somebody in elected office, and he ought to resign. And Chad, I got to tell you, these efforts in the background to try to rehabilitate, some of the things I'm hearing was, well, he had a really tough childhood, and he grew up in Chicago, and it wasn't a nice neighborhood, and he had some bad interactions with cops there. And I'm thinking, listen, lots of people have had bad childhoods. Lots of people have had bad things happen in their life. It doesn't excuse this behavior. And by the way, you're Republicans, and all these guys talk all the time. Oh, the Republican platform. We got to follow the platform. Well, you know what one of the things of the Republican platform is? Personal responsibility.
Rob, knowing some of the people you're having these conversations on the background, it infuriates me to suggest that they're suggesting they should give Nico Rios a pass. I just flipped that. There's a Luke Simons thing. They don't give the same sort of empathy or grace to the kid in downtown Chicago who's dealt with this stuff, who's now selling drugs and in prison and whatever. Right. So they only give grace to the guy that they know. They only give grace to the guy who moved up here.
It's situational.
I mean, come on.
It's situational. Now, one thing that I do think is valid that they bring up is, well, if Rios has to resign, why not Doctor? Now, the situation are not necessarily apples to apples. I understand that. One is horrible, bigoted comments made in the context of an arrest for a crime. The other is a somewhat complicated business deal. But listen, I've called on Representative Doctor to resign, and I think it's fair to say some of the Republican leaders who are quiet on Doctor but have spoken out on Rios, maybe they should explain that, because, I think they both ought to go. Again, my feeling is, and ultimately it's up to the voters in these districts, but I'm allowed to have an opinion as a conservative and a citizen of North Dakota. And I think that both of these men have disgraced themselves and have besmirched the dignity of the offices that they hold. And maybe that's something. People like to be so cynical. It's like, oh, none of these, they're all corrupt, they're all terrible or whatever. I don't buy that. The people who
I hate it. I hate it.
No.
I'm the son of a politician, the spouse of a politician. I know lots of politicians.
These offices.
These officers, political folks, they're all in, the vast majority are in it for the right reasons. And the fact that, Rios was on camera, that's why it's easy, right? It's easy. You can see it. Jason Doctor's alleged crimes are much more complicated, but should be equally or more concerning. But again, I go back to, like I've said many times, Jason Doctor is part of one side of the Republican, the more traditional whatever, so the folks aren't going to be, and even with Rios, I mean, the people you're talking to are people who are part of that sort of Bastiat sort of world,
right,
who are saying, cut them some slack. They wouldn't be giving the traditional Republican the slack.
It's tribalism even within the party, where
Amen.
the Bastiat tribe doesn't want accountability for one of their own. The normie tribe or whatever is maybe resistant to accountability for one of their own. Some of the stuff with Rios specifically, where he's, that was one thing they all kept telling me was, well, he's going to apologize to the officers. Okay, well, I checked it out. I contacted the Williston Police Department. Rios mentioned that in an email weeks ago, shortly after it happened, and he hasn't followed through on it. So is Rios lying to you guys? All of you out there who are listening to this and defending Nico Rios and thinking that he shouldn't resign, is he lying to you about what he's doing? Because that was one of the things when Majority Leader Lefor was talking about, like after the arrest first came public, but before the video became public, Rios called him and said, "Oh, I got a DUI," and unfortunately, that's somewhat routine. Lefor told us that he told Rios that, said you got to take accountability and you got to apologize and everything else, and then was blindsided by the video. So all along, like Representative Rios, even the people who are ostensibly on his team, he's not been honest with them.
Right.
And you have to wonder why you would want somebody like that in office.
And I assume the play here from Rios and who's ever advising him is the theory that it's just going to go away, right? That We're just going to move on to the other thing. But I also find it very interesting in the last week or so that we've had Doug Burgum has called for Rios to resign through his spokesperson, at the same time endorsing Donald Trump.
Yeah,
like I cannot connect these dots, right? The stuff that Trump has been involved in, to be sharing the stage with him, but at the same time then saying Rios should resign because of what he did here. There's some, again, I don't know, I don't know how to express the disappointment and the sadness I feel over Burgum endorsing Trump, and then not only endorsing him, but getting on a plane and campaigning for him, and
getting on Trump's plane.
I don't get it, man. I don't get it.
Some context there. Burgum wasn't exactly chomping at the bit to call on Rios to resign. I don't think he said anything about it publicly until I reached out to his office, at which point, and he kind of dodged a little bit, where he said, I back, the legislature. I'm forgetting the exact wording, but essentially not,
up to the legislature.
The legislature is a separate branch of government, but I back, House Majority Lefor's call on him to resign. So, they weren't exactly enthusiastic about it. Enthusiastic's the wrong word, but they weren't exactly forthcoming with the call for accountability. And then, but they did call for it. And then he stands on stage next to Trump, who, if anybody needs accountability, it's that guy. And not just endorses him, then gets on Trump Force One, Trump's private airplane, and flies to New Hampshire, and then flies on to New York. And what was Donald Trump doing in New York? But he went there to attend the second civil trial in the defamation case with E. Jean Carroll, who in her first case against Trump, won a multi-million-dollar judgment in a case where the jury found Trump liable for raping her. Rape, sexually assaulting her. And it's shocking to me. I am listening. The other day I was talking to a Republican lawmaker, and they were kind of from the populist wing of the party, and they were raking me over the coals for my criticism of Donald Trump. And me standing by the things that I'm saying, I don't understand how you can support somebody who's been found liable for rape. And then they brought up, Joe Biden and all the pictures of him massaging somebody's shoulders or child's shoulders or whatever. Now, listen, I look at some of that stuff and I don't know. Some of that stuff, it's not how I would touch other people. But to compare that to
a convicted,
to somebody who's been found liable, again, not convicted in a criminal court, and there is a lower evidentiary standard.
Right.
I'm not skirting past that. But found liable in a court of law, and then had the judge come out and say, no, specifically, he was found to have raped in the civil court, in the civil trial. The judge said that. For him to say it. And the excuse from the Trumpians is all these judges are out to get him, all the prosecutors are out to get him, in all these jurisdictions and all these states and all these courts, everybody's out to get Trump. And it's never that Trump did the things that he's accused of doing. Like, that's never a possibility. The Rios thing is one thing. I mean, that's obviously a very local example. I am worried that increasingly we are completely disconnected from any sort of accountability. If that person's on my team, then I don't care what they do. I'm always behind them because I don't want to ever concede anything to the other side.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. And I was thinking, I'm curious on your take of Kevin Cramer was pretty aggressively negative about the idea of Doug Burgum getting chosen as the VP.
Yeah.
And I think what Cramer was saying that, he's already got the electoral votes in North Dakota. It doesn't make any sense. But I was a little surprised that Cramer, what has he gained by being on the record talking about?
Yeah.
Does he not want to be second fiddle in North Dakota?
So those were comments that the senator made to Breitbart, and I linked to them in my column about Burgum traveling with President Trump on his private plane. I was surprised when I read them. It was more like he was just being unusually candid with his analysis, because that's kind of my analysis too.
Let's be clear. It's not unusually candid when it's coming from Senator Cramer. He's usually pretty candid when it comes to his political
takes.
That's
true. I like my favorite quote that I ever heard about Senator Cramer is that he's recklessly honest. He doesn't, and I appreciate that about him. I mean, you may not like what he says, but he's usually not ambiguous about, what he's saying or what he's trying to do. I think you could be in danger of reading too much into that. I don't think that's anything against Doug Burgum. I think that's just his honest analysis of, probably Doug Burgum's not going to be the vice president. And that's kind of how I feel too. I mean, I look at that analysis and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. What's the advantage for putting Doug Burgum on? The one danger we have is trying to analyze anything Trump does through the perspective of him being a normal presidential candidate, which he is not. So all the normal criteria that you would have for a vice presidential candidate, that you're getting somebody who's going to deliver a certain constituency to the ticket, I don't think Trump cares that much about that. So
no, and anybody he's thinking about, I can't imagine. I mean, he's talking about Stefanik from New York. He's not going to win New York if he adds her. I mean, Kristi Noem, all these different. I don't know that they add or subtract anything.
Right.
Obvious.
The one thing is if you put like a Vivek Ramaswamy on, then you have the skin color thing where.
And generational differences.
Generational thing where you have a young guy who obviously appeals to a class of young voter. It's an unfortunate reality that skin color matters in politics. I guess that checks a box as well, but I don't see Doug Burgum. Now I don't know. I think there's some real smoke there in terms of like a cabinet position, and that surprises me. The cabinet position would also allow, because the other moving part in all of this is whether or not Burgum's going to run for a third term as governor. A cabinet appointment is not going to happen until after the election. So, I mean, that gives Doug time to run for governor and then potentially be appointed to the cabinet and hand the governorship off to his running mate. And I've heard a lot of people say, oh, that's Doug, he's going to win the governorship for his Lieutenant Governor Tammy Miller. And then, that's why, I mean, right away, if he intends to take a cabinet position, he needs to be clear about that with voters. And he's probably not going to be. And if they do that, they'll probably play it off as, Trump called, and even though I won the governorship, I want to serve my country now. I mean, there's ways you could spin that off, but North Dakota voters deserve to vote for somebody they know is going to finish the job when they're in there.
Yeah, how frustrating would that be? Because, I mean, so Trump wins in November, Burgum wins in November. Conceivably, their term starts, December 15th to be governor, something like that?
Yeah, it's before the organizational session.
Yeah, I mean, so conceivably, he's going to be vetted even before he's sworn in for this third term. That would be exceptionally frustrating to me if he runs just to hand it off to Tammy Miller.
And I don't know if the voters care. I mean, you have the voters in North Dakota do not view Trump the same. Most of them do not view Trump the same way you and I do. I don't know a lot of them would care. But
won't they care if somebody, I mean, no offense to Tammy Miller, I don't know her, met her a few times. I don't think I'm unique. Nobody knows who she is. So for Burgum to do that and then have this person appointed governor, first woman governor of the state, I think there could be some blowback, not necessarily towards Doug.
Well,
at that point,
she wouldn't have really been vetted. Like, what's her position on the issues? I mean, I've spoken to her, I've interviewed her. I probably know more about her than the average voter, and I got to tell you, I don't know where she's at on most issues.
Right.
I know a few of the things she's kind of done under Governor Burgum and watched her preside over the state Senate, but that doesn't really give you an inkling.
Yeah, she pardoned a turkey.
Right. So I don't know. How does she feel about abortion or taxes or any of these other, issues that are going to be important, or whatever issues might be important to you? I mean, that's the electoral process, right? The candidate gets out on the trail, and then we start to understand more how they're going to govern if they are elected. That's the whole point of that. But if you're the running mate, you're the lieutenant governor, we're really not going to get that about you.
In the running mate, like, this is the first time she's going to be on the ballot, right? I mean, Sanford was on the ballot the last time. Yeah.
She's never been on a ballot.
Yeah. And so so let's say hypothetically this goes through. Does she get to finish the whole term, or would there be a special election 2 years later? Do you know the answer to that?
I think she finishes the whole term. I think that's right. I mean, the last time it happened was when Hovan left to run for the Senate, but that was halfway through the term. Right. I would have to go review at the statute, but I think it's hers, because the lieutenant governor is a different, like if the governor appoints somebody, the appointment has to be confirmed, but this isn't an appointment. She was elected to be lieutenant governor. The whole point of the lieutenant governor really is to take over when the governor is not governor anymore.
Even if it's for 3 years and 11 months. Yeah. And I think even the Dalrymple situation was a little different, because he's a longtime lawmaker. He'd ran
long-time lieutenant governor. He'd been lieutenant governor for 12 years.
Yeah. People knew him. People knew where he stands. She's new to this game.
Also, I mean, it's a little different. Hovan, you can genuinely say, might not have run in 2010 if Byron Dorgan decides not to run. Like, I don't know. I think it's a little different. Somebody, like, the circumstances change. Somebody retires and they decide to run for a higher office. I know people hit him on it. I remember him being criticized for it. That didn't bother me that much. And again, because the decision still had to be signed off on voters, right? Like, they elected him governor. He ran for the Senate. They had to decide whether or not they wanted him to be senator. And obviously they did. They voted for him. I mean, that doesn't bother me as much as I'm going to run for governor knowing that I'm going to accept a position to serve as Secretary of Agriculture or something in the Trump administration. That's a false premise. Like, you campaigned on a false premise, So yeah. I hope that when he makes the announcement, he makes it clear what his intentions are, should he be called. And the thing is, if he's transparent about it, and then the voters vote for him, then hey, will of the people.
Right. And from Burgum's perspective, he doesn't know if he's going to get appointed. I know that there's people in the past who thought during an election, if a certain person wins, that they would get appointed to a cabinet position, and then it never worked out.
Right.
So maybe Burgum just wants to see this through. But I just am so like the Trump endorsement, and again, I can see that John Hoeven endorsed Trump, Kevin Cramer endorsed Trump, right? I mean, but the fact that he was on the stage on election night in Iowa, and he's
right.
Going state to state, and again,
I mean, there's different ways of endorsing Trump. Hoeven endorsed Trump in a very terse press release to the public.
Yeah.
He didn't show up and effusively praise, Donald Trump. Also, Burgum had the status of being the only, at the time he did it, was the only one of Trump's opponents in the GOP, in the presidential primary, to endorse him. Like, he was the first. Now, since then, Vivek Ramaswamy's gotten out and has endorsed him. I don't think any of the others. Asa Hutchinson certainly hasn't. Chris Christie certainly hasn't. is not going to. I would lose all respect for Chris Christie at this, but if he turned around after that campaign.
I don't know. You don't have to be too old to remember when he did it the last time.
That's true.
I mean,
well, you look at the number of craven, and that was I wrote that column about don't forget the noose, Doug, because I'm thinking, what is the benefit other than I guess you get to put on your resume that you were Secretary of Energy, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of wondering if that's what because Doug was adamant, like, oh, I don't want to be vice president, I don't want to be the cabinet secretary, and politicians say things that have an expiration date all the time. Right. But I'm kind of wondering if what changed is he's thinking, maybe I can't get elected in 2028. Maybe Secretary of Energy or Agriculture or something is going to be the high watermark for my political career. And that's not a bad high watermark at all under normal circumstances. But when you look at like if you're Secretary of Energy and then Donald Trump, maybe because Donald Trump doesn't care that much about what the Secretary of Energy is doing on a day-to-day basis until he gets into a Twitter spat with Gavin Newsom or something in California, and he goes to a Secretary of Energy and says, turn off California's power or something, right? Something crazy like that. And now you're in a position where your choices are explaining to this imbecile that the Department of Energy doesn't have the power or the authority to turn off California's power. And that it would be unconstitutional and completely outside of the bounds of public service, or you face Trump sicking his mob on you and they show up with the gallows. Why would you want to potentially, and maybe that's an outlandish thing, shutting off California's power, but it's not like he asked Mike Pence to do something wildly unconstitutional. Yeah. Mike Pence, whatever else you want to say about him, to his credit, resisted that call and then had to go through what he went through with the death threats and everything else.
So, I hadn't thought about the fact that Burgum's position may have changed on cabinet because he figured out 2028 might not be attainable, but that does make some level of success or sense. I mean, he spent all this money, did not move the needle an iota in either Iowa or New Hampshire or nationally.
New Hampshire, I think he topped out like 4 or 5% in a couple of polls.
But by the time he got out, he was back to 1 or 2 in the vast majority of them. He may have you're right. He may figure out that's, the only way he wins in 2028 is if he hitches his wagon to Trump, or that is the being a cabinet member is sort of the top of it all. But I have to imagine he figured out somebody with his bio and sort of normalcy that can't be elected. I mean, 4 years, it's not going to change that much.
No. In
terms of who the Republicans want as their candidate.
Which is another thing that frustrates, because it makes it seem like the endorsement of Donald Trump was just careerism. It was just...
How can it not be?
It's just Doug Burgum.
He just said that he wouldn't do business with the guy a few months ago.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, you went from, would you do business with Donald Trump? I don't think so. Why? Because I think that you should be judged by the company you keep. And then months later, you're standing on stage next to Donald Trump saying this should be the next president of the United States. I don't know. I think it's Doug Burgum looking at the stream and trying to figure out which stones he needs to jump to get to the other side where he wants to be. And that's a poor reason to endorse a presidential candidate. And it would be excusable in another context if we were talking about a normal presidential candidate, but we're not. We're talking about Donald Trump.
So, Rob, there's a letter to the editor that went after you a little bit this week. Said that, okay, you don't like Trump. There's only one other option. Why haven't you endorsed Joe Biden yet?
Yeah.
What would you say to that writer?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I reject the idea that it's a binary choice. I'm not obliged.
But don't you think at some point it becomes a binary choice that if you want Donald Trump to not get elected, not that your vote in North Dakota is going to matter, right? I mean, we know this, but I mean, we're going to get to the point, Rob, where the only thing that's going to stop Donald Trump's presidency is Joe Biden. Yeah. With all the flaws that you see in him, it's the only thing.
I don't accept that my vote in North Dakota doesn't matter. I mean, if enough people change their mind in North Dakota, suddenly it flips. Fair. I think it does matter. I don't think you have to vote against Donald Trump to hurt him. If Republican voters like me just don't vote for him, period, that still helps him not be president. I'm not obliged to think of Joe Biden as being a good, and I know you think he's a good president. I disagree. I'm a conservative. I look at his policies, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the way we're handling a lot of things in the Middle East right now. I think the way we've handled things at the border, these things bother me. I don't think he's been a good president on that front. And I'm not going to pretend like he is just because Donald Trump's a terrible human being. Like that doesn't suddenly make Joe Biden a better president, was the point I was trying to make. Now, that being said, I mean, at the calculus, if people like me mean what we say, that Donald Trump's a threat to the Republic, and I do, is there a point at which we have to hold our nose and vote for a Democrat to make sure he doesn't get that office and ruin it? I mean, because the one thing I will say is that Joe Biden is only a bad president. And we can survive bad presidents, and we can survive bad policy.
And we've done it a lot in the past, right?
I don't know if we can survive Donald Trump refusing to leave office in 2028, or some of the other things he would do between Inauguration Day 2025 and 2028. I mean, that maybe I'm struggling with this.
But isn't this like the sort of fundamental question of this election? I think the two things that I'm thinking about is how does Biden motivate the base in the Democratic Party to get a vote? And that's primarily people of color. I think Barack Obama comes back in and helps motivate those folks and reminds them of him.
Yeah.
And then the other question are people like the 50% of people in Iowa who voted for somebody other than Donald Trump. 30% of the people who voted in Iowa who said they won't vote for Trump if he's convicted of a crime. What do those people do? Do they actually follow through that they won't vote for Trump if he's convicted? And does that mean they don't vote?
Right.
Or does that mean they vote for Joe Biden? I think those are the two big questions on if Joe Biden gets reelected or not get reelected.
Yeah.
What do the Rob Ports of the world do? That's the question.
Yeah. I don't know how many voters are out there like me. And I will say I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016. I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2020. I didn't vote for anybody. Both of those cycles, I looked at the third party candidates to see if there was somebody, I could make my peace with, and there wasn't. Kind of sometimes, I mean, I'm always kind of hopeful that maybe the libertarians will come up with somebody who's not crazy.
Gary Johnson didn't do it for you?
Gary Johnson didn't do it for me. Despite being born in Minot, which, goes along. I mean, how can you be bad? But no, did not do it for me.
And so thinking back to 2016 in particular, you didn't vote for Trump. When he won in 2016, I was scared to death. Were you scared then? Did you think this is how it would go?
I didn't think it would be this bad. To me, that the point at which in 2016, I didn't want him to be president, but a lot of people I love and respect voted for him. I mean, I've got a lot of Republican family and stuff. Women in my life that voted for him. I mean, the big thing I broke with Trump was his comments about women, and then a lot of Republican women in my life voted for him. I spent some time after the 2016 election searching, like, what am I not seeing in this guy? That so many people that I respect in my life are supporting him. I spent some time looking at that. There were policies that emerged in his administration that I supported, and I tried to give credit where it was due. But the thing that really just turned it was January 6th. I don't see how anybody could look at the position that he put our country in, the position that he put his own vice president in, what he condoned that day, can look at that and say, this is somebody who deserves to be president of the United States. So before that, maybe Donald Trump was just a bad president, right? And then he crossed over into something else after January 6th, in my mind. And I don't know how anybody else can see it any other way.
And it is amazing, thinking about things that were said in between January 6th and January 20th, in terms of Republicans, and we can't have this guy get elected again, and how those people have switched so dramatically in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of, and again, I understand Republicans who like Trump's policies, that he got things through, he got judges through that you like, but it feels like it's so much bigger than policies. To your point, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. I think he's done a good job. Do I see the flaws in Joe Biden? Absolutely. Do I think we could do more at the border? Absolutely. I think that Democrats have dropped the ball. I think now they're trying to fix that a little bit as we're into an election year. But man, when it comes to the two choices, and here's the deal, it's easy for me to say, we've never had a Democrat who's done, not recently, a Democrat do to the country what Trump has done, right? And so it's easy for me to say, what are you going to do, Rob, when I've never been put in that position, when I'd have to vote against the policies I care about.
I think one of the positions a lot of Republicans are in is if you oppose Trump, then you're a liberal now. You're a Democrat now. And I don't think the Democrats are evil. It's not that I don't want to be associated with Democrats or anything. It's not like like they're calling me a child molester or something. It's not that. I'm just not a Democrat. I'm just not. And I don't appreciate being called one because it diminishes, views and philosophies that I am very passionate about, that I care about. And it's insulting to me. But I think there's a lot of Republicans who, they'll because they don't want to get lumped in. Well, if you're not supporting Donald Trump, then you're supporting Joe Biden. Like, it's a binary thing. And I don't appreciate that. I don't think it's accurate. I don't think it's fair.
We're seeing it on the local level. You and I were texting yesterday about the Brandon Pritchard outfit, who's putting out a press release that is calling out all these people, 30 some odd Republicans, on one vote, and saying they're woke Republicans. That had to do with one of the many transgender bills.
I have a column going up about that, and the remarkable thing about that is, so Brandon Pritchard, the backstory is State Representative Brandon Pritchard. He's a first term, been through exactly one legislative session. Young early 20s kid, puts out this press release that calls out a couple dozen, almost 3 dozen of his Republican colleagues, calls them woke, calls them Republicans with scare quotes around it, and everything else, calls them spineless because of one vote on a bill that was about pronouns and transgender students, and then suggests that it's his goal to either get them to sign his group's pledge, and his group is Citizens Alliance of North Dakota, and this is an organization that's been involved in other states that has done the same thing, kind of targeting moderate Republicans. But the thing about all that is, and obviously his thing is they're either going to sign the pledge or we're going to spend money and defeat them. The thing about that is the bill he calls them out for was a Senate bill. The lawmakers most of the lawmakers he names voted for a nearly identical House bill that Governor Burgum signed into law. It does the same thing. It's the pronoun bill. The pronoun bill passed. This was a second pronoun bill. So he's ringing them up for voting against a bill when they voted for a pretty much identical bill, and all but I think 2 of the 9 senators that he names in that email voted for the House bill, and I think all but 6 of the House lawmakers of the 24, I think, House lawmakers that he names, all but 6 of them voted for that House bill. Now, as a personal matter, I didn't like either bill. I think the motivations are cruel. I think the motivations come from people who want to make North Dakota an unwelcoming place for the LGBTQ community. I find that disappointing and abhorrent. But setting all that aside, the attack that he's launching on his colleagues as a first-term Republican lawmaker, who's also the executive director of this group, isn't even factually correct, really.
He's not a serious person, right? We've talked a lot about this. This isn't about going to create policy. He's just going there to piss everybody off and make a name for himself. You don't go, I mean, it's 33 people I think were named in this original email that I saw yesterday. Maybe it's more than that. I mean, how do you go after that many of your colleagues? They talk about, governing as strange bedfellows. I've seen some really, really interesting partners work together on different issues.
Sure.
Who the hell's going to work with Brandon Pritchard?
Well, that's this kind of stuff. That's a point in my column. Like, if you're a voter in District 8 and you elected Brandon Pritchard to represent the needs of your district, of your community, I got to be thinking, how is this guy going to make deals for our school district or for our water district or any of the other myriad needs that come up in a legislative district that a lawmaker who represents that district is obliged to represent?
But he doesn't want to, Rob. He doesn't even want to make those deals because he doesn't care. He cares about Twitter. He doesn't care about actually delivering for his district or the students in his district or the community members. I mean, it's not his priority. His constituents are not his priority. Brandon Pritchard and his sort of profile are what's most important to him. And we have too many elected officials like that right now.
Yeah, we do. The focus is not on, really, it's not on budgeting. Budgeting in a way that, because it's a balance, right? As a conservative, your goal as a conservative is not just to cut the budget to zero. We got to spend some money. Your goal is a conservative budget, right? Your goal is an efficient budget that delivers the things that the government should be delivering and keeps tax burdens low on he's not interested in engaging on that because it's all just about scoring points. And it's certainly not just him. He's got a coalition of people around him, that populist wing of the party, whatever you want to call them. But I'm afraid that approach, that increasingly that's what they think public service is. And it doesn't matter. And even to the, to the Representative Rios thing, again, it's just about clinging to office. It's just about Representative Rios clinging to office. He disgraced himself. He shouldn't have been in office. He should leave. And really, you could say the same thing about Jason Doctor. I think that's a valid criticism. He should go as well.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's not even partisan. These are safe Republican districts. If Jason Doctor leaves, he's going to win those seats. He's going to be replaced by a Republican. In both instances, District 23 and District whatever that I'm forgetting 7 that Doctor's in Bismarck. The NDGOP local committee will appoint somebody to replace, or maybe not. Getting this close to the election, I'm not sure how that works. Either way, whether it's the local NDGOP committee or the voters, it's going to be a Republican that replaces them.
Right.
There's no political risk here. There's no partisan risk here, other than the party ridding its caucus of 2 people who don't deserve to be there anymore.
Yeah, I agree, and it's not going to affect it would be a net positive for Republicans in the state to have these 2 guys resign.
And by the way,
they don't have to.
They
don't have to be reading your columns about it every other day, right?
I would, yeah. Well, yeah, maybe. And by the way, I would call on them to resign even if there was a possibility that a Democrat could replace them. Let the chips fall where they may. They don't deserve to be in office anymore. That's not part of my calculation where, these are safe districts. It's okay. That's not where my head's at.
Even if they were like swing districts and a Democrat won, so then the Senate would be 42-5 instead of, you know what I'm saying?
Well, neither of them are senators. Neither of them are senators, but it would be
understood. But
Democrats would have 15 members of the House instead of 14.
Rob, the math is easier for me to do on the Senate side because it's half as many.
I always forget how many representatives we have. I don't know why. I can't keep it.
47 times 2, Rob. Should we work through this? It's 94.
94. All right. You're being mean to me now. That for some reason districts I have a hard time remembering legislative
Well,
district numbers.
It's these darn sub-districts that are confusing you, right, Rob?
No, that's not the problem. I forget which numbers are where sometimes.
Yeah.
Because it's not even like, Minot has 5, 3, and then 38 and 40.
And 40.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Why?
But the nice thing about Minot is those have been the 4 districts there for a long time.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, District 23. I mean, when you think about that used to be Joan Heckman's number,
right? Yeah, on the eastern side of the state. Yeah. We do some weird stuff sometimes. All right, we'll put a pin in it there. Thank you so much for listening, as always. If you would think about it, I know I've asked this for a couple times. I've seen people putting up reviews for the podcast on Spotify or Apple or whatever. If you haven't done that, if you'd leave us an honest review, I'd appreciate it. It helps other people find the podcast. In the mystical algorithms, I guess it helps other people find the podcast if they're searching for it. So
yeah, I mean, but if you're gonna be mean, don't be that honest in your reviews.
I don't. Yeah.
Rob, there's enough nastiness online. If you're gonna leave a review, make it a nice. Give us a 1-star, but say nice things.
There you go. Like, at least they tried.
Not bad for a Yankees fan.
Not bad for a couple of baseball nerds. All right, we're gonna leave it there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.